Hi, I'm Bridget Price.
And I'm Lauren Kemp.
And this is Entrepreneurs in Progress. As entrepreneurs, we have to trust our instincts. That can be a scary thing to do when you're trying to make a living. It's probably why we write out our business plans, look for investors, or pursue a side hustle first. We need data and hard numbers to support our instincts. In this episode, Lauren and I will talk about using our intuition for decision making and when we have to turn to the data. Let's get started. So I know that we instinctually have an idea of how we want to run our business, how we want to operate it, but how do we trust our intuition when it comes to pivotal decision making in business? And I think a great way to start this episode, as we have been doing, is for our listeners defining what we believe intuition is in relation to this conversation, or just generally, and how we define it for ourselves. So how would you define intuition?
Intuition is well, first of all, this is a definition that I found online and I was like, oh, I like that. So I wouldn't say like I came up with this,
Right.
But just to start out.
Great disclaimer.
Intuition is the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. So I really liked that definition of intuition, whereas data-driven, meaning there's hard data to support your position, usually things like statistics, market research, that kind of stuff, versus just a feeling.
Yeah. And for me, I define intuition similarly, but also understanding it's a collection of past experiences, events, some actual previous data that you might have access to that really help guide our intuition and our instincts and knowing what could be coming up or how to plan for future events or decisions that we have to make. Mm-hmm. So I think it is really made up of things that we have in our subconscious that we've lived through or can foresee. And our gut usually fires off and tells us what the right decision is before we even actually make it.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I think that entrepreneurs starting out the gate, we have to follow our instincts or trust our guts because we're going and literally taking a leap of faith often with our businesses. Even though other businesses have proven to be successful, whether they're in our same industry or same landscape, when we go out and do it ourselves, we're always worried about if we're making the right choice or doing the right thing. And typically, we don't have any anecdotal experiences of our own to turn to. We just have to, follow our heart and follow our gut in a lot of our early decision making. And I know for me, when I was starting, my college consultant business, I had to trust some of my initial instincts on how I wanted to go about operating. For me, that included offering more of a package pricing versus hourly rate, because I wanted to get my feet wet and I felt hourly would scare clients off. And I felt like the package worked out for me for a little bit, but then obviously looking back at the data and how many hours I was pouring in, hourly would be more effective in that type of company or that type of business.
Well, it depends, because you could also, there are like different levers you can pull. So you could either put in more boundaries around stop times, or you could do the hourly. Yep. So I wouldn't necessarily say that was the wrong decision for that business, because I've talked about pricing before, and Brian and I love the package idea, and that's how we price our projects instead of doing hourly. So
yeah, I think
no, you were wrong.
Yeah, I don't think I was wrong in that moment. I just think that I got more evolved information in terms of how I operated and what the client's expectations were, and how that can influence future pricing, and even how we go about pricing now in the cleaning business. I think that we have very little information to go off of when we are launching into a business head first, even though I think entrepreneurs, we try to do a lot of our homework. We try to do a lot of research. We try to mimic some of our competitors and what's going on. And sometimes you just have to make the call. Like, you have to just make that decision.
It's so different when you're actually in it. So many times you plan for something, and this is true even with life, where it just doesn't go as you planned it.
Yeah.
I feel like that is constantly happening in our businesses. Of like, here's our strategy, here's how we're planning, and then, oh, over here is doing better, or something else is working, or this is not working. Or so you always are learning on the go, I feel like.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And for you, Lauren, how, now that you are a few years in, how do you come or how do you go about making your decisions? Do you feel like it's more based on your intuition? Are you more likely to turn to the numbers? How do you go about making those important decisions for your business?
So I tend to lean more intuition based versus Brian, who tends to be a lot more data driven.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is I feel like I really trust my intuition as well. Like you said, it allows you to make quick decisions. It's based off of your previous experiences. And when I look back on the decisions I've made or where I've ended up in life, I feel pretty good. Like, I feel like in general, I make good decisions and I really do trust my gut. And I wouldn't say it's completely without data. There's this quote by Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, said, "We start with the data, but the final call is always gut. It's informed intuition." And so I like to believe I use a lot of informed intuition. I'll do some of the research, but I feel like on the spectrum, I tend to lean more towards intuition. And that might be a little overly confident, but that's why Brian balances me out with the data.
How does Brian feel about your decision making in terms of leaning towards your intuition and trusting your gut?
He's not a fan. Okay. He's always like, okay, Lauren, show me the numbers, show me your research, like convince me, give me a good argument for why we should do this decision this way.
That sounds eerily familiar. Yeah, like verbatim.
Because sometimes I can't explain and I'm just like, and then I'll have to go research and try to pull numbers and stuff. And like, I've already lost some of the credibility with Brian, but he also recognizes that there is room for intuition. He's not so staunchly data driven that he won't accept an intuition decision-based thing, but he's very much on that end of the spectrum. So you're saying it sounds eerily familiar. How is it with you and Marcus?
Literally, I feel like in this instance, Marcus and Brian are the same people. Like literally convince me with the number, show me the number, show me the data, that type of conversation. I will say that when we engage in that conversation, and if I don't always come or lean in with the numbers and I tell him like, yo, this is what happened last time, or this is what's happened in a similar situation, he is comfortable and trusts me enough to make the final call. So I'm grateful for that, because I also, like you, I lean towards trusting my intuition or gut in terms of quick, pivotal decision making, not necessarily long-term strategy plays, but more or less things that we have to make in the moment or decisions we have to make in the moment. And Marcus will literally, something can be on fire, and Marcus's approach is, let's figure out how to prevent a fire for the future. No, how to put this fire out now, and then we'll get back to that. For me, I have to hurry up and make really important calls, and I use my intuition to do that. And I'm not tooting my own horn, but it is pretty effective. And it's funny because I was also reading that women tend to make more successful intuition business decisions than men do. And I think that men want to fall back to the logical data, numbers, information before making a decision, because I think they can't, I don't want to generalize. I think men have a hard time accepting a wrong decision if they have to say it was because that's what I thought was the best thing to do. If the
it feels more personal.
Yeah, if the data fails them, that's one thing, because they can shift the blame, and it provides more of a sensical story as to what happened or why something failed and what to avoid next time. But if they decide to make a personal choice or decision that's guided by gut or intuition, I think they steer clear from that. And women, I think we are just more in tune with all of our surroundings and things that are going on. And we have more of a holistic approach to decision making than just looking at some numbers or looking at the data. Because we've talked about this before. I really do believe that data is important, but I also know that data can be skewed. Numbers can be off. Numbers don't always reflect the current environment or situation or circumstances. And someone else's numbers aren't going to mirror our numbers. Regardless if they're in the same exact spot that we were a year ago, and now we're where they are, and we use their information to try to make an informed decision for us, it's not the same. It just can't be.
Yeah, it doesn't tell the whole story. It's a data point. It's an important data point. It's something to consider. But I think it's like you said, it's that holistic approach to the situation and all the other things, not just data. And I think you also made an important distinction earlier when you were saying how you tend to make the intuition decisions, like for quicker things, when like you need to solve something now, but you don't have time to do research and to sit with it and think on it for a while, versus if you're doing a long-term strategy or something that does take a little bit more in-depth thought and consideration. So
yeah. And I think that's for both of these ideas, intuition and data-driven decisions, they both have their place. And I think that as entrepreneurs, we have things that come up every day or decisions we have to make every day that we didn't think we'd have to make for that day. We have our planners, we have our to-do lists, we have the things that we're trying to tackle, but then new problems arise that require immediate attention. And we just don't always have the time or resources to dedicate to trying to resolve a problem using just the numbers. And I feel like sometimes that approach is just super linear and myopic.
Yeah, I also think it's funny how Marcus and Brian are the data-driven ones, because they're also creatives. They're also artists, and I don't usually associate those two things together. I feel like they would be like the free-flowing intuition-based decision-making, people.
I know that they were both in business school, so I feel like a lot of that is taught out of us, even though they are naturally creative. I think that for years, we've been told to look at the facts, look at the data, support your ideas, your theses, all of those things by using hard information. And I feel like people want to be credible. So in order to make themselves more credible, they rely on those numbers and those data points, because it's hard to argue against facts. Lately, it seems as though that's not the case, but that's a conversation.
What is real? What are facts?
What are facts? We won't go down that path.
I think it's true that if I'm arguing with someone, I do want those facts and supporting evidence, and that's something we learn through school. Because if someone just says, "Oh, because I feel that way," in an argument with me, I'm like, that's not going to fly.
Yeah, only your parents can say, "Because I said so." And even still, as kids, we're easily annoyed when they use that argument.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought it's an interesting point that that's been taught to us and ingrained in us, that you need to support your argument. But then here we are doing intuition based decision making.
Yeah.
And I think too, we got to point out there's some people who have bad judgment. Like there are some people who maybe should focus more on the data, because maybe your judgment and intuition has not been working out for you,
Yeah.
Maybe you should be looking at the data more.
I think that's an interesting concept, because that to me shows that intuition, one, can be honed. And I think there's a part of intuition that requires a high level of self-awareness, whether it's you being self-aware of what's going on around you and how you react or how you respond, or having that awareness around what you need to do given the circumstances, or recognizing if you've been in this position before. And I think those who lack strong intuition completely close that off. They are not, it's almost like they're not rooted in reality to a certain extent. They haven't processed past experience as well. They haven't really shown a high level of introspection. And I think those are the people who struggle with really being able to make great decisions based on their gut or intuition.
That makes sense. I feel like intuition is about taking in all that information, as much information around you as possible, and factoring in so many different things. And if you're just so focused on the data, that's just one point.
Absolutely. And I also agree with the idea that some people, they're bad at their intuition because they are choosing not to lean into intuition. So, like, they might say they're following their gut, but that's only to sell you. So, you might have someone who believes that their idea is their decision is the wrong decision, but they have to sell you on it. And so sometimes they appeal to the emotion side, the emotional side. Oh, I know this is, I feel it in my gut. I feel it. You got to feel it to believe it, type of thing, even though they really don't believe it. They're just silently hoping that it all works out.
Yeah.
And typically does it because they haven't really, again, honed their intuition skills or their instincts. And then honestly, I think people can just have really bad instincts. People can really have bad intuition. People can just be wrong.
Yeah.
That why is a whole nother, I don't know, thing to tackle. It would, I think, would have to peel back a lot of layers. But I think naturally entrepreneurs have a stronger intuition than most.
Yeah, because you're usually seeing like an opportunity in the marketplace that like there's a hole and that needs to be filled. And usually entrepreneurs, I think, are the ones seeing these opportunities everywhere and are trying to take advantage of them. They're noticing things around them.
Yeah. No, again, it's this hyper awareness of everything going on around them. And when you decide to participate or become an entrepreneur, again, depending on where you are in the stages, you have to rely a lot on faith, and you have to rely a lot on things guiding your gut, because you don't have a lot of experience in terms of what to do or where to start or what decisions to make. There are serial entrepreneurs who have laid the foundational work, and they already know what it takes to get started. They know how to leverage certain pieces of information. But if they're going into a new industry or a new business that they've never done before, it's still nerve-wracking. Regardless how many businesses you have under your belt, you're literally trying to take something from scratch, and you're questioning a lot of your early decision making. And in that regard, you have to rely on your gut.
And if you move industries, like just because you were successful in one industry doesn't mean you're going to be successful in a completely different industry, because they're not the same. Technology industry is vastly different than the restaurant industry. Like you could potentially find success, but it's not a guarantee. It's not a given that your processes and how you've built previous businesses will work in a different industry.
Yeah, for sure. And entrepreneurs, they make those types of intuition-based decisions after they've already made a decision. So they may have made a decision based on their gut, and now their gut's telling them, okay, that was actually the wrong decision. You need to get out of this. This is what you need to do. Like, I think that, again, because it's informed decision making, you have new information, you have to decide to use that. And I think data can come in and help justify if your gut feeling is right or not.
So speaking of which, do you have any examples of how you and Marcus have used data to surround your decision making and some of intuition?
Yeah, there's quite a few examples with regard to our cleaning company, but with regard to data, we were able to determine how much we should raise our prices. We were able to pull the data for how long it took our cleaners to clean on average, what they were making, and then look at information from our other competitors and see what they were charging for the same type of service. And based off of new hires that we were having coming into our ecosystem, they were demanding significant higher pay. And at first we were like, no, like that's ridiculous, because our current staff members are okay with what they're being paid, or at least what we thought they were, because they hadn't really said anything. But then as this new wave of hires kept coming in, and they were telling us like, no, this is what I want to make per hour. We looked at the data, we looked at the room that we had that we could raise prices to, and based off what our competitors were doing, we're like, oh my gosh, we're right. The market has justified this price increase, and we can not only pay our existing cleaners more, but now we can bring in a new set of cleaners at this new rate and make everyone happy. And so that data was super important, because we were able to export information from our cleaning teams like work logs, their diaries, see exactly how efficient
Sure.
they were. And then we are able to communicate based on their efficiency, like how they've improved our quality. And basically that also justifies our price increase, our 5-star reviews, that type of thing. And so that made it easy to raise the prices. It's still a little scary because we hadn't raised prices in 3 years.
Yeah, raising prices is a big decision. It's one of those ones that you want to take the time to really consider. So it's not one of those quick decision things where you just throw up a new price. It's definitely one of the ones that I would feel fall under the data-driven decision making, where you want to look at all the different data points as you can, competitor pricing, what's working currently, what are the other anecdotal things you're hearing. Like you said, you're hearing from new hires. It was the same for us when we raised our prices. That was a data-driven decision. We looked at as many different data points as we could to inform how much we were going to raise our prices.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're okay with that. I think sometimes there was maybe the last 6 months or so, something pulling at us, speaking to us instinctually, letting us know maybe we should consider raising our prices, but not a strong enough nudge for us to just flip the switch. Because you're right, it requires a lot of work in the back end to increase those prices. And I'll even speak on this now because we only increased the prices so far for our new customers. For our current customers, I was looking at the data just a few weeks ago and I told Marcus, I said, hey, this price increase for our current customers to our new pricing is going to be it's going to be a huge price shock. So we're going to have to figure something out and meet in the middle. And we looked over the numbers, we looked over the information. He's, oh yeah, you're right. That's for some of the customers where they're looking at almost a 70% increase. And we're like, that just can't happen. That type of decision making that's driven by the data can help us improve our margins, improve our revenue, or improve our profit share. That's the type of decision making we want to use or have data inform us of, not just following our heart or following our gut on those types of decisions, because those are decisions that can make or break you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you say for you and Brian, pricing was also something that was a data-driven decision. Was there anything else that you have or can you recall recently that has been driven by data versus your instinct?
I mean, our YouTube strategy, that was partially based on data, partially intuition, but now we're seeing the data to back up that strategy. I guess that's not one where we had started with data. I think the price increase is the best example that I have of us making a data-driven strategy that like affects us long term. It's hard to think back to like when we were getting set up and when we were deciding on packages versus stuff. Like it wasn't necessarily data-driven. It was data-driven in the sense that we had our own previous experiences that informed how we were going to run our business and what we wanted to do. I guess like with hiring, I did a little bit of research to try and figure out what was the best way to have the hiring process go smoothly and be not just a good experience for me and Brian, but a good experience for the candidates, and what could we do to remove bias and stuff.
Any future decisions that you guys are making that you have been using the data for, like either it's forecasting or any products you're planning to roll out? Or
we might be doing a strategy shift. It's hard to tell. Like right now, we're still in that phase where we're testing things out. Like we're going in one direction. We haven't had a need to pivot or figure out something that would require a large amount of data for us to make that decision. So like right now, we're in our second month of like a couple of down months. And so we've been talking and trying to figure out, okay, do we need to adjust our strategy? Do we need to wait and see what's happening? And then of course, like we've already been doing things to turn things around or change things. And usually it takes a little while to see those come into effect. So we haven't had to make too many like largely data-driven decisions. I don't know. We've already had our strategy in place. I don't know how we make this. How do we make decisions?
I think that's really great in the sense of like really understanding sometimes entrepreneurs' plights. Like every day isn't going to be a conversation where you're trying to make a decision and you're like, okay, whip out the data. Okay, let me look at the numbers. It's that I don't think entrepreneurship really happens that way. We want to, and sometimes we romanticize the numbers and knowing your numbers and knowing your information. But in terms of future planning or even trying to figure out where you are in these last couple of months and what's going to happen in the next few months, it's hard to just pull the trigger on what decision you're going to make. And you're still collecting data. I think there's a period of time for entrepreneurs where you're still in the process of collecting the information before you can really make one. And I think that's why entrepreneurs lead with this intuition. It really takes a while to really get enough information to determine which direction you're going to go or how you're going to pivot, or if you need to pivot, or if you need to have an better understanding of what's happening in your industry.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, like we haven't had to make a giant strategy decision in a while. Like one, because we've only been in business for a year and a half. Like we already made the major decisions when we were starting out last year. Like I said, the last big strategy decision was raising our prices. We don't have enough data to figure out some of these other decisions that we've made, but I think that's it. If you already have a strategy set in place, if you already started and you have your hypotheses and you're trying these different things, it needs time to gather data. It needs time to see if it ends up working or not. And I think maybe that we just don't have enough data yet. And also that we don't need to make these kinds of large data-driven decisions that frequently.
Absolutely.
When I think of like bigger companies and like they have budgets and different departments and there's a lot more decision making going on there. Like right now, it's just three of us.
You're still in the process of laying the groundwork. What are some of the, I guess, day-to-day decisions that you all make? And it sounds, based off of what I'm hearing, a lot of the day-to-day decisions are just following that instinct, following that intuition, and just making them depending on, the circumstances or what's happening.
Yeah, I think this probably happens more with Brian and our employee who are client facing, and they have to make more day-to-day decisions on how to approach the workshop that they're doing or how he's going to position selling our services. I feel like for me in particular, I don't have as much day-to-day decisions that I need to make. I'm going along with how things are going. Like I'm keeping an eye on how things are going and how we might want to change some things or alter some things. But I guess, I don't know. Mostly I feel like it must be intuition based because I don't feel like I have to make a million decisions a day. Like we have our strategy, we're following it. We have our services that we need to deliver. And those have been like, we have a process for that. So I follow the process and I've been mostly focused on building out more of the processes or keeping finances in check for taxes. And I don't know, do you guys have a lot of decisions that you need to make every day? Where are all these decisions coming from?
Yes and yes. Some days are quieter than others, but we are in a different space. So in October, we'll be hitting our 4th year. And so we are trying to make decisions to optimize and maximize not just our customer experience, but our cleaner experience. And a lot of our decisions, quite honestly, for me, I can say just in the day-to-day is scheduling and in the operations situation. Like I have such a strong pulse on scheduling. I'm trying to get out of it, but my gut around knowing my cleaners' behaviors, knowing trends that I've picked up on, it's crazy. I can pinpoint to the day almost when particular cleaners are going to call out sick or when they are going to become unavailable. And let me just put a disclaimer out there, guys. We're not ruling with an iron fist here. We want everyone to take sick days. We want everyone to do all of those things. But I know when that is going to happen. And some of my admin staff, they can sense it too. They're learning that as well. So a lot of my decision making comes from making last minute calls or changes to the schedule, knowing who to have on the bench in case I need to call for backup. So I'm constantly making those last minute calls. And I know that we can get to a place where a lot of that can be automated, where we have the consistent schedules, we have the consistent teams, we have a consistent process for how we vet specific clients in the Airbnb or vacation rental space. Other decisions that are being made, we've toggled back and forth as we've transitioned from using contractors to employees. That has been some intuition, a lot of data, just based on where we are with the economy and how people are going about choosing work and what they're looking for and that type of thing. We are constantly thinking about automations. So we're trying to automate as many processes as possible. But there's so many.
But is this like a daily thing? Every single day you're looking into automations? Like,
if you ask Marcus, yeah. Yeah, it's one of those. I feel like sometimes we have delayed decisions. Like we're constantly talking about it. We're constantly getting new insights or information. Marcus always has his hands in multiple like Facebook groups or conversations with other like cleaning industry experts, people who have been where we are right now in our stage and offering advice. Yeah, we're constantly making these day-to-day decisions. And
it sounds like a lot of that's research too. Like you're gathering data and you're gathering information. Whereas I feel like maybe I'm just like, oh, like we've made the decision and now we are following through with it. And then we're thinking about other decisions, but we haven't necessarily made the decision yet.
Yeah, we do make those decisions on a day-to-day basis and we go back and forth. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm definitely more listening to my instinct and gut, telling Marcus why I feel this way. And I try my best to cater to his needs in terms of what will make him comfortable with also getting his buy-in on the decision. So if he needs support or hard facts or data, I try to collect as much as possible to provide to him so he feels confident in my decision making. Or I don't ever want to come off like I'm right, I know I'm right, and you just have to listen to me. I'm going to respect him as a partner and give him what he needs in order for us to come to a collective decision. So,
well, what do you do when you come to a disagreement about something where it's he wants data and he doesn't feel like you've given enough and you feel so strongly with your intuition that it is the right decision? But like I said, what do you do when you're both
we used
kind
to
of
have
at that?
a lot of those intense conversations like a couple of years ago, all the way up until maybe beginning of last year. And one reason we were having those intense conversations is because Marcus was doing kind of the research, the homework, the data gathering, all of those things to try to move or pivot into this direction. What would happen is he would essentially do like a data dump on me and give me bits and pieces, and I still would have limited context as to why he wanted to make this change. But based off of what I was hearing, some of the decisions that he wanted to make, I felt weren't the best decisions for the company. So it was hard for me though to make my case because he did all the research, he did all the fact gathering. He's talking to a number of people who've done similar pivots or moves. And all I have is, no, that doesn't sound right. And not really being able to offer any other suggestions or feedback to help him reassess some things. So it was like butting heads because he felt like, how could I tell him no or tell him that this isn't a bad idea or this is a bad idea when I am coming in at the tail end and I don't really have all the information that he has. And I felt, stop siloing me, stop going off and finding all this information and just coming. And because sometimes it felt like he was telling me this is what we're going to do, but he tried to make it seem like he was wanting to get my buy-in, but really he wasn't. He was basically nicely telling me, oh yeah, we're going to do this. And so what I used to do out of frustration, which isn't always recommended, but this is sometimes the battle with working with significant others, is I would just defer to him like, hey, this is your company. I know that for the most part, there isn't any decision that we can't come back from, right? There's not anything that we can't necessarily undo. It might be a little inconvenient. It might set us back maybe, but ultimately it's your company. So you do whatever you feel is the right thing to do. I will support you. And then if it's not the best decision, then we can regroup and figure something else out. But I know we literally had this conversation the other day about us working together and making sure we're on the same page, because both him and I can operate in this silo space. I'm handling our admin staff and all the operations, and he's high level strategy. And sometimes we're two ships passing through the night. And I said, we need to be better about having conversations and making sure we're both on the same page.
That's a similar thing that Brian and I do. As I like, eventually I will, defer to him like, hey, this is your business.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's best for your business. And as the leader of the business, when it's your idea and your baby, you know the vision, the direction, and you have a better understanding usually of decisions that you want to make for your business. And so there are definitely times where we disagree and we try to figure out how strongly does, the person feel about whatever topic or decision that's being made. How big of an impact will this decision have? Because if it's a smaller thing that it's not a big deal, then there's a little bit more compromise. But if it's a bigger, obviously like strategy thing, then not as much. But when it comes down to it, it is their brainchild, their business. And that's how I felt about Cozy Cactus and stuff. Because one area where Brian and I tend to like disagree is branding usually. I'll usually want a higher level of branding. Like I wanted product photos that were nice.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't like, and my argument was like, hey, if I'm the audience, like this is the stuff that I care about. What I should have done is just go online and show them all the different statistics about how like 90% of people think that product photos matter when it comes to e-commerce. So now I have a better understanding of how to approach him and try to find that data ahead of time. But we just have different views on how we want to build brands and businesses. And when it comes to our separate entities, I'll be like, just because I don't agree with everything, every decision you make, and he doesn't agree with every decision I make, but that is okay. And it helps to defer to whose enterprise is this. And I think you made a good point about how there's no decision that you can't come back from usually.
Right.
Like,
right. Yeah. Typically in where we are, both you and I, within our businesses, and we're not, I don't know, Microsoft or, we're not going to make such a, detrimental decision that we can't undo, because one, we wouldn't risk the business in that way. But two, I feel like we're so lean and nimble and agile, we can quickly pivot if need be. So small businesses have sometimes the luxury of that, and sometimes the space that they're in. It might be different for other industries like restaurants and things like that have really, skin tight margins. But for the most part, we can undo a decision or accept that was a wrong move and then pivot. And that's what's happened before. We've thought something was going to work and it didn't. We've had to pull back. We've, had to adjust. And that is the nature of business. You have to sometimes undo some of your decision.
And I think you do end up you already have an invisible safety net, unless you just make wild, crazy decisions to begin with. I feel like if you're already either a practical or down to earth, or you don't usually make like super risky or super out there decisions, you already have that built-in safety for whatever decision you end up making. So like, you're not gonna just randomly risk $50,000 on a decision. Like if you don't usually make decisions like that, usually like, okay, like let's risk 5,000 on this decision, or you almost have a built-in safety net based on your decision making to begin with. Unless I think of sports gamblers or people who are more high risk and make wild and crazy decisions, or could be even like, I don't have any other examples right now, but
no, I do. Like
adrenaline junkies, like people that are way outside the norm. Exactly.
But no, and those businesses sometimes depend on those types of crazy decision making. If you are a sports gambler, operate a high stakes business, you have to make those high stakes decisions. And we're not in that space. So we're grateful for that. Quite honestly, sometimes it's hard when you're working with other people, like us working with our husbands, it's hard sometimes to lean into giving them what they want. Like you mentioned, you could have just went and showed Brian that, hey, 90% of people prefer a high level brand when shopping online or in the e-commerce space, whatever, versus trying to articulate that in an argument. And especially with these two guys who are super data driven and data focused, like they don't care about our feelings. They don't care. I mean, they do, but when it comes to business and investing, they're like, man, I need to make sure that we're making the right decision. That's not influenced by what you think, but what you know. But Marcus is super impressed with how I'm able to use my intuition to make informed decisions, like again, with the scheduling, with certain people that we hire, people we don't hire, prospective clients or contracts, etc. And it's really because I'm right now more in the weeds than he is. And we lean on each other in that regard. I think it's great that he is more data driven than I am, and that I'm more intuition based than he is, because we can come together and really make great decisions based off of that.
I like how it was, like we said earlier, it's informed intuition. Like I think entrepreneurs need both. Like you can't solely rely on data, and I don't think you can solely rely on intuition. I think you need to have both to help you make decisions in your business.
Yeah, I think they both work together. And so even though this conversation is intuition versus data driven decisions, I don't think it's really a versus. I think they work together. And I think that you need people on your team who can support both types of decision making skills. So I think both can obviously be honed as well. And I think with business, you really do ultimately collect a number of data points and experiences and insights that you infer and use to make future decisions. We're going through that right now, just being in operations for 4 years. At the beginning, we were very adamant about telling our cleaning teams, like Phoenix is widespread. The cities, you could travel 30 miles just in between Scottsdale alone, right? Between North, South, and Central Scottsdale. And we're like, okay, maybe it's a little unreasonable that we're all over the Phoenix metro area. Maybe we just need to focus on specific zip codes or cities within the Phoenix metro area. And so just, again, using that information from feedback from our teams and driving around ourselves, just getting a sense for it, and us like, okay, this is the right thing to do. I wanted to touch base on like sometimes how we go about making our decisions in terms of how our body responds to issues that arise. Okay. And I think that with using intuition to make decisions, I think you should listen to your body. If you sit still enough, or if someone asks you a question, or what would you do, I think you should spit out that first idea that comes to your mind. That doesn't mean that's what you're going to ultimately do, but that is showing you what you're initially thinking about the information that you've been presented with and how you would go about handling that. And leaning into that initial response could help you figure out what could be the ultimate right decision, or at least give you something to lean on when you're thinking about solving a problem.
So I'm smiling because that is definitely how Brian likes to go about and making decisions. Like we'll talk and it's just stream of consciousness, like whatever comes to his mind first, and he'll work it out as we're talking and walking. And I fucking hate that.
Oh, oh my gosh.
I am like, no, come to me when you have something fully formed. Like I'm not the person that likes to spit out the first idea that comes to my mind. I like to sit with it. I like to think about it. I like to form it a little more, and then I like to present it to be evaluated and figure it out from there. So that's funny.
Yeah, I feel like I do both. I feel like I have an initial response, but then I do like the idea of processing it or sitting with it and figuring out everything that I hadn't considered before my initial reaction to trying to solve something. I've learned that sometimes when I've moved too fast, like I make a flub. And it's best just to even give myself an extra 5 or 10 minutes before making the final call or decision. But yeah, that's interesting. Some people have to really work through what their gut is telling them to do.
Yeah. So it's a little bit different. So I tend to make decisions faster than Brian. So just because I don't go with my exact first initial thing, I think through it and I'll get to what I think is my decision a lot faster. Whereas Brian, even though he'll talk things through and he like goes with the first thing he has in his mind and then works through it, he will spend a much longer time making a decision because he needs to gather all that data. And whereas I like to sit with it a little more, I don't want to go with the first thing, but I let my intuition run and I'm like, okay, I got to move on to the next decision. I thought about it. Let's move forward. I'm not the most patient of people.
Oh, yeah.
I definitely like to keep things moving. Like, let's try it. If it's not a high stakes, big decision that needs a lot of data and thought behind, let's just go learn. And we can easily pivot if it's such a small decision. But I'm like, let's put things in place, because you can spend so many hours just sitting there strategizing and not getting anything done.
I have to work on that. So I am a quick trigger puller. So I'll pull the trigger on immediate decisions. Like, we got to, like you said, we got to keep it moving.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear what you're saying. Yes, this is an ongoing problem. Yes, we need to develop a process around it. Yes. But right now, in this very moment, I need to solve X, Y, Z. And I think what Marcus struggles with regard to my work style is he's always worried that something else is going to come up, like another quick decision that I have to make that might be,
or that this problem is going to repeat.
Exactly.
Solve it, the root of it.
So he's like willing to put everything on hold when literally it's not possible. And he's like, no, before you do anything, let's actually iron everything out right now so this doesn't happen again. And I'm just like, dude, I have to do this right now. Like, you don't understand. But yeah, I think that even comes down to just compromise and prioritizing longer strategy around decision making and how that's going to impact our business overall. And I could be better about that with being more urgent about developing a long-term strategy over just moving our was it shotgunning or whatever it's called, where you're basically just quickly calling the shots and moving fast in the moment. So I need to be better about planning for the future. So I think that the main takeaways in this conversation and some of the information that I pulled online, they have a few recommendations for like when to follow your intuition and when to use data or facts. And I think we touched on this before, but like when you're working on something that requires an immediate decision, you have to make the call. I think that's when you should use your intuition. Repetition tasks that you've done over and over again, you can follow your gut on that. And even just coming up with ideas, that's where I have the kind of spitting out whatever comes to you first type of idea and working with others and seeing that where that takes you. I guess that's great when you can use your intuition and in support of using data and hard facts. I do think that when you're trying to deploy a new tactic or strategy, obviously you do want to lean into the research and get the right information. I think when you are trying to work in a public setting or work in a place that requires credibility, you want to be able to rely on numbers and statistics. And then also when you are I feel like this goes back and forth, but when you're hiring new people, I think you have to use a really great mix of intuition and data to make the right hires.
Yeah, I think that's the main takeaway for me from this is that you want to have a bit of both. You want to have informed intuition and that, like you said, when it comes to bigger decisions, you want to have more data. When it comes to fast decisions, you should probably rely on your intuition a little bit more. But it's good that we both have a balance where Brian and Marcus are the data people and we're the intuition people. Yeah. Because I do think you need both.
Yeah, you do. I think that's how you survive ultimately. And I think, again, entrepreneurs, we're thrown in the fire all the time. We have to make quick calls and we have to follow our gut. So interestingly enough, people in business tend to lean more towards trusting their intuition than like non-entrepreneurs. So people who are just 9-to-5ers. They actually trust the data more than following their gut. So nice. I thought that was interesting. Yeah. But anyways, we hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. Follow your heart, follow your gut, but make an informed decision. Use the data to support anything that you're feeling. But be sure to like, subscribe, all the things, and message us or connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. We'll be here. So until next time.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. And thank you, Bridget.
Thanks, Lauren. Talk to you soon.